And the subject is North Korea. And yes, the possibility of war. At the Aspen Institute 10 days ago, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Joe Dunford, said there's always a military option. It would be horrific. Lindsey Graham on Today's Show earlier this week said we need to destroy the regime and their deterrent. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said on Tuesday, I believe, to North Korea, you are leaving us no choice but to protect ourselves. And then the chairman, the chief of staff of the Army said, just because every choice is a bad choice doesn't mean you don't have to choose. Are we looking at a preemptive strike? Are you trying to prepare us, you being collectively, the administration, and people like Lindsey Graham and Tom Cotton, for a first strike at North Korea?
Well, what you're asking is are we preparing plans for a preventive war, right? A war that would prevent North Korea from threatening the United States with a nuclear weapon. And the president's been very clear about it. He said he's not going to tolerate North Korea being able to threaten the United States. Look at the nature of that regime. If they have nuclear weapons that can threaten the United States, it's intolerable from the president's perspective. So of course, we have to provide all options to do that. And that includes a military option. Now, would we like to resolve it short of what would be a very costly war in terms of the suffering of mainly the South Korean people, the ability of that North Korean regime to hold the South hostage to conventional fires capabilities, artillery and so forth, Seoul being so close. We're cognizant of all of that. And so what we have to do is everything we can to pressure this regime, to pressure Kim Jong-un and those around him, such that they conclude it is in their interest to denuclearize. And there are really, I think, three critical things came out of the president's very successful summit with President Xi of China that were different from past efforts to work with China, which has always been, the desire, right, to work with China on the North Korea problem. The three things that came out of that are, first of all, that North Korea, Kim Jong-un, armed with nuclear weapons, is a threat not only to the United States, not only to our great allies, Japan and South Korea, but also to China. So that's a big acknowledgement. The second thing was that the goal of working together with them cannot be the so-called freeze for freeze, where we freeze our training and then they freeze their program, because they're at a threshold capability now. Freeze for freeze doesn't work anymore, right? It's intolerable. So the goal is denuclearization of the peninsula. That's the second big thing. The third big thing that came out of it is China acknowledged they have tremendous coercive economic influence here. They may not have a great political relationship with Kim Jong-un, I mean, who does these days, right? But they recognize that they do have a great deal of agency and control over that situation. And so we are prioritizing, the Secretary of State in the lead, obviously, prioritizing an effort to work with the Chinese. As the President has said, as the President has tweeted, right, we also, though, have to be prepared to walk down a path that assumes not as much help from China as we would like.
Now, that would mean, back to the preemptive strike, or some kind of action against Kim Jong-un. Should he be sleeping easily at night?
No, I think he should not be, because he has the whole world against him, right? He's isolated. He's isolated on this. Since 1953, the Korean Peninsula has been in a state of armistice, right? The war never formally ended. And there's been no aggression from the United States, South Korea, any of our allies.
If he were removed, General, would the regime's behavior change, if that one individual were removed?
Well, I'm not sure about that. I mean, I don't think anybody has a very clear picture of the inner workings of that regime. What is clear is that it is an authoritarian dictatorship that it existed since the end of World War II. It is now in its third generation, and there is a difference in this third autocratic ruler in that he's as brutal as the previous two have been, but he's doing some things differently. He's killing members of his own family, even. And so what this means for the future of that regime, I mean, I think it's really it's impossible to predict.
Is it legitimate? You've done a lot of strategic thinking about this. Is it legitimate to attempt to achieve regime change by the removal of one leader of a regime? Is that a legitimate tool of international affairs?
Well, well, I think it depends on really the legal justification for that, right? And this goes back to just war theory, and what is the nature of the risk, and does that risk justify acting in defense of your people and your vital interests.
We know the risk a little bit. In 1994, when the first North Korean deal was signed, the people who executed it, Gallucci, Dan Poneman, Joel Witt, wrote a book, and they quoted a general as saying, if there's a conflict called going critical, there will be 1 million casualties. 1 million casualties. Is that still a good estimate of what happens if a preemptive strike unfolds in North Korea, General?
You know, one thing about war, it's impossible oftentimes to predict. It's always impossible to predict the future course of events, because war is a continuous interaction of opposites, a continuous interaction between your forces and those of the enemy. It involves not just the capability to use force, but also intentions and things that are just unknowable at the outset. And so I think it's important to look at a range of estimates of what could happen, because it's clear that in war, it's unpredictable. And so you always have to ask the question, what happens next? What are the risks? How do you mitigate those risks? And obviously, you know, war is the most serious decision any leader has to make. And so what can we do to make sure we exhaust our possibilities and exhaust our other opportunities to accomplish this very clear objective of denuclearization of the peninsula short of war?
If we were to go into a preemptive strike, General McMaster, of some sort, large, small, whatever, would we tell the Chinese before we did that in order to manage their expectations and to limit the possibility of a replay of the Korean War?
Well, I can't really talk about any details associated with operational plans or strategies, but it would depend on the circumstances, I guess. Have
you sat with the President and walked through how China might or might not react to a preemptive strike and how they unpredictably entered the war in the first Korean War?
Well, as a rule, we don't talk about deliberations with the President, but he's been very much involved and has been deeply briefed, you know, on all aspects of the strategy on North Korea.
How concerned should the American people be that we are actually on the brink of a war with North Korea?
Well, I think it's impossible to overstate the danger associated with this, right? So I think it's impossible to overstate the danger associated with a rogue, brutal regime, I mean, who murdered his own brother with nerve agent in an airport. I mean, think about what he's done in terms of his own brutal repression of not only members of his regime, but his own family.
Reuters had a story earlier this week. 2 U.S. officials, senior officials, confirmed that the ICBMs that North Korea tested can reach anywhere in the United States. Can you confirm that, General?
No.
You think it's
I'm
right?
not going to confirm it, but but as I mentioned, really, I mean, whether it could reach, you know, San Francisco or Pittsburgh or Washington. I mean, how much does that matter, right? It's a grave threat.
Does South Korea need its own nuclear deterrent?
Well, this is a very important question, right? And of course, it's U.S., United States extended deterrence, nuclear deterrence extended to our allies, that has been really a key to the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. If that regime is broken, that non-proliferation regime is broken, it's bad news for everybody. And so imagine now at Northeast Asia, with a nuclear-armed North Korea, South Korea, Japan, China, Russia, right? All of countries
Pakistan,
reside.
India, yeah.
And so, is that what China wants? Is that what Russia wants? No. I mean, so it is in all of our interest to ensure that North Korea denuclearizes.
When we return, I turn General McMaster's attention to Afghanistan, where NBC News has been reporting a deep